The last piece of app functionality that's not wired up to Firebase is the edit expense functionality. When we edit an expense, it does change locally in Redux, but it does not change Firebase, which is definitely a problem. We want to make sure Firebase changes as well, so we're going to be setting up an async action for editing an expense, just like we did for removing an expense in the last one. That means we're going to be making changes to the exact same 4 files, and just like the last video, I'm going to have you do this on your own, giving you as much real-world experience programming as possible. So step 1 is to create start edit expense. We want the same call signature as edit expense. We just need the ID and the updates. What are you trying to change? Then you're going to write a test case for this one, test that start edit expense works. You can use something like should edit expense from Firebase. So you want to make a real change to one of those dummy Firebase items using start edit expense. Then in your test case, you're going to assert it was actually changed by fetching it and looking at the values. Next up, you are going to need to make some changes to edit expense page. Once again, instead of edit expense, we want start edit expense, which means you'll also be adjusting the test cases. So the flow is very similar to the last one. Take as much time as you need to knock this one out. Go ahead and make sure your test cases pass, then check out the application in the browser and make sure that's working as well. All right, pause the video, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. All right, welcome back. Hopefully that went well for you. We're going to kick things off just like we did last time by starting off with our asynchronous action. So right over here, we're going to define that in expenses.js. We can export a const. We can call it whatever we like, but I'm going to stick with the start prefix. So that would be start edit expense. And I'm going to set it up to have the exact same call signature. So we need the ID and we need our updates. Then we can set up our function, and this is where we are going to return the function that gets called with dispatch. So going through the exact same process as we did earlier. Now inside of here, what's the goal? In the last one, the goal was to remove the expense. In this one, it's to apply those updates. So we are still going to access database.ref, and we're still going to look for the exact expense, the one with the ID provided up above. So I will pass into ref a template string. We'll start off with expenses. We'll add a /, then we'll inject the ID right here. Excellent. And from here, we're going to go ahead and use the method we used previously. That would be .update. This is how we can apply updates without overriding existing values. And I already have the updates object, so I can just toss updates right in there. Now at this point, do we want to do anything? Yes, we do want to add a then call. I want to run some code when the updates are successfully synced. And this code is just going to dispatch edit expense to change Redux. So right here, we can use dispatch. And I will just call edit expense, and I'll pass in those same values. I can toss in ID, and I can toss in updates. Excellent. Now, I do want to make sure to add return onto here. It is an easy thing to forget, but it's important because otherwise we won't be able to actually do something after start edit expense completes over inside of the test case. So we're going to toss return on right there, and there we have it. We have a complete start edit expense function, and what we're going to do before we actually implement it into the app is to just write a test case for it. So let's go ahead and save this file, and what I wanted you to do next was to add that test case. I'm going to add it just below edit expense right here. I can add a test call. We can set up our test case, should edit expense from Firebase. And then all we're going to do is actually dispatch that asynchronous action and make sure the actual data on Firebase changed. First up, let's create that mock store, const store equals. We're going to call create mock store, and I'm going to pass to it the initial value, which is just going to be an empty object. Now, down below, we're going to go ahead and define some of the variables we'll be using throughout the test case. I'm going to start off with a const for ID. And for this one, let's try to edit the first expense. Expenses, I'll grab the first one, and I'll grab its ID. Next up, I am going to define my updates as well. Const updates, this is just an object, and we can update whatever we want. I'm just going to choose to update the amount, and I'll switch that over to some other value. Let's go ahead and use $210, so 210 and 45 cents. Awesome. We have the amount update in place, and the next thing to do is to actually dispatch the async action, which means we are going to need to import it up above. We have edit expense. Just below edit expense, I'm going to add start edit expense, toss a comma on the end, and now we can actually take advantage of that in the test case. Right here, let's go ahead and use store.dispatch to dispatch start edit expense. We are going to pass to it the two things it needs, the ID as the first argument and the updates as the second argument. And since we did return the promise, I can toss a then call on right here to actually do something once the data is synced. In this case, what we're going to do is go ahead and make sure everything that should have happened actually happened. Right here, if we are going to be adding async stuff on, we have to define done and actually use it. And I'm going to kick things off by making an assertion about the action. So const actions equals store.getActions to get the actions array back. We should just have one item, so we're going to expect something about the first item in actions, grabbing the first item, the index of 0. Then we can use to make our assertion. Now there are just a couple of things on here. We want to check that the type is correct. It should be edit expense. We're also going to check that the ID equals the ID from up above and that updates equals updates from up above. If all of that is valid, then we know the action was dispatched correctly. Next up, we want to make sure the data actually changed on Firebase. That's the whole point. So right here, we're going to fetch the data and check out the amount value, making sure it was indeed changed. I can return that so I can chain things on. That is going to be a call to database.ref. We're going to look for that expense, so I'll provide a template string, expenses, / I'm going to inject the ID. Then we want to get the value, so I will use once with value. And since we have the returned promise, we can chain on a then call right here, .then. This will fire when that promise completes and we actually fetch the data from Firebase. All we're going to do is access the snapshot and take a look at the amount value. I can expect snapshot. I'm going to call val to get that object back. I'm going to grab amount off of that object and I am going to expect it right here to be the number from up above. So I can just expect it to be updates.amount. Excellent. The last thing left to do would be to actually go ahead and toss done right here. And there we are. Everything is complete. And now we can focus on running the test case and making sure that's working. Let's head over to the terminal. I'm going to clear the terminal output. There we go. And then once again, we are just going to run the test suite, yarn test. We're going to make sure that the new test case does indeed pass. And if it does, we'll move on to actually making the changes to edit expense page. Remember, this is still using edit expense, not start edit expense. The test cases are indeed passing, so let's switch this over, adding start up front and switching that over to a capital E. Now we can just go through this file and change the few references to edit expense. We have one right here, and down below we have two more. So I'm going to change that guy, the second one, and the third one. Now that we have all of that changed, the test case is going to fail because we are no longer passing in the correct stuff. So we're going to switch that up over here as well. Up above, we have edit expense. I'm going to switch that over to start edit expense. And then we have a few instances down below as well. I got one right here. I got two. There's 3, 4, and 5. Now that we've changed the references in both of those files, I should be able to restart the test suite and see everything passing. I'm going to use yarn test one more time, and if it is passing, all we're going to do is make sure that when we run the dev server, we actually can see the updates taking place. Everything is passing, so a call to yarn run dev server is going to be next. I am going to visit the application at localhost 8080. And this time around, we are just going to have our two expenses. We had a third one, but it did get removed for real in the last video. Once the dev server is up, right now it's compiling things, we should be able to see the two. There we go. I'm going to change this over to something else. I'll say from the edits, I'll switch the price over to 23 bucks. I'll move the date to August 31st in the future. And then for a note, I'll just add some note. Now I can hit enter. We can actually see the changes being made. We have from the edits, we have 23 bucks, we have August 31st, and if I click back over to it, we are indeed getting the note. Now that we have this in place, we are all done. We can add expenses, we can get expenses, we can remove and update expenses. Everything is in place in terms of our integration with Firebase, except for something very important, which is authentication. Authentication is the topic of the next section. That is it for this section. I am going to wrap things up in this video by making a quick commit and deploying to Heroku. Right over here, I got to git status. We got those 4 changes, git commit, am, add, start, edit, expense. I'm going to make the commit, push it up to GitHub, and then use git push Heroku master to get it up to Heroku. So in this section, we took what we knew about Firebase and what we knew about Redux and combined it together using the enhancements from Redux Thunk. This allows us to create these asynchronous actions that get some work done, like communicate with Firebase, then dispatch a regular action that actually changes the Redux store. In the next one, we're going to be integrating authentication. It's something that comes built in Firebase that is going to allow us to set up authentication via whatever means we want. And we're going to be sticking with social login. I am very excited to get to that section, so I will see you in the next one.